So, you talked about your call in the ministry and your experience, which happened during your young adult years. Tell me about your development as a minister and the people who mentored you during that process.
Okay. And just before I say that, I guess a great challenge for me was working at lock screen in college because I wanted to get a car, and that's how I bought my first car, was working at lock screen in Roxborough. So as I move on with my people that was mentors and encouragement to me, I would say my pastor, Reverend T.R. Soule, he was one of my greatest encouragement because he did encourage me in the ministry. Reverend Wesley Soule, he was the pastor of Mount Olive and Mill Hill. That was a lot of encouragement. Reverend Ronald Brooks, he gave me a lot of encouragement during that time. And then Pastor Ted Poole, he and I had become friends. We met in high school and we became friends as I was called into the ministry, and he had been called maybe a year before that. And I got an opportunity to do my first funeral. I had not been ordained. I was still licensed. And I had to have an ordained minister with me to do that funeral. And Reverend Soule, it was at Mill Hill. He could not be there, the pastor of Mill Hill. So I asked Pastor Poole, because he was ordained, and he came to that service so I could preach that service, and I'll never forget that. So Pastor Poole and I have been friends down through the years. We're still very good friends, and I just thankful. And then there was the ministers from Cedar Grove Association. That was our association. St. James was in Cedar Grove Association, so I attended Cedar Grove Association regular. Even as a child, a teenager, young adult, I went to the association. In Person County, there was Reverend U.R. Booker. Reverend Booker always preached sermons that really touched me, short, sweet, to the point. That was my father's pastor from Sweet Gum, Reverend W.E. Mills, who died when I was probably a senior in high school, but his sermons and the way he preached always stayed in my mind. I could remember that from a teenager. So there were many pastors, ministers, mothers of the church, deacons, deaconess, trustees, just adults overall that was in the church that was saved, Christians that encouraged me along the way. And I remember sitting in church so many times and I could see the old deacons get on their knees and they would pray. And they would pray and they would sing and they would cry. And I would say, God, I sure would love to do that. And as I've grown older, I see that in my life now. There are many of them. I hear some people say, oh, I don't remember nothing. I don't remember no sermon. I didn't pay attention. I didn't hear the preacher. But even from my young days, I remember the preachers and some of the sermons they preached. I know God was in my life from a child. My mother told me one time, she said she carried me to the hospital as a little baby. And she said, this old lady was sitting there and just rubbed my feet. And she said, this boy is born for good luck. I don't like the word luck because I believe there's no luck as far as Christians. But I do believe that as I was born, God had a calling on my life.
I want to get to what you talked about with the deacons praying and the women of the church and the men of the church, the older ones back then, and how they were so filled with the Spirit. What's changed?
You know, that's a good question because back then people came to church and they was eager to get there, eager to be a part of the service. It seemed like, I guess it's just time, the generation, I look at people just change. It's not that praise like it used to be. People will pray and sometimes they say teaching. Teaching is good. We got to have teaching. We got to be taught, but still we got to be spiritual. So I guess just the time, and maybe with all the computers and technology may have brought about a lot of change. People just not as into church now, because where they used to would be at church, now they can stay home. And even before the pandemic, they was watching sermons on TV, watching service on TV, listening to it on the radio more. So I guess some of that had to do with the change.